Have you ever been in an audition where everything is going well, and then you notice the casting director watching you? You're still in the scene, still in character, still focused on your piece, but suddenly a part of you leaves. You start tracking the casting director. A glance down at your resume, a shift in their posture, a micro expression you may or may not be imagining. Or maybe you start watching yourself. Why'd you say that line like that? Do you even know the next line? What in God's name are you doing with your hands? And suddenly, there are two experiences happening at once. One version of you is in the work, and another version of you is watching the work. And if that's true, then how can you possibly be present? Hi, I'm Brian Zane. Welcome to The Actor's Nervous System, a podcast about acting, embodiment, and the nervous system. This is episode 3, Self-Consciousness versus Presence. So, back to that audition scenario, where you're working and watching yourself work. I think most people would call that self-consciousness, but I'm not so sure that's the best word for it. Because it doesn't feel like awareness, it doesn't feel like being conscious. It feels like splitting attention. This happens everywhere, not just acting. Job interviews, first dates, public speaking, teaching, even recording a podcast. Trust me. A part of us leaves the moment and starts self-monitoring, like a helicopter mom, only worse. And strangely, that part of us usually believes it's helping. It thinks, if I watch closely enough, I'll stay safe. I'll perform correctly. I won't mess this up. But quite often, the opposite happens. The more we monitor ourselves, the more we scrutinize ourselves, the less available we become to what's actually happening. There's an old story that captures this really well. It's called The Centipede's Dilemma. Demidov uses it as an example in his book. In the story, the centipede walks perfectly well and he's in a great mood. And then a toad comes along and asks the centipede how he coordinates all those legs. When you're lifting your 37th right leg, you're putting down your 13th left leg. How do you do it? And the moment the centipede tries to explain himself, he falls apart. He can't walk anymore. Not because anything changed externally, but because his attention turned inward in a way that disrupted what was already working. A lot of human skill works like this. Piano, golf, conversation, driving, acting. Things that are learned and embodied don't always improve when we supervise them more closely. There's actually a name for this in psychology. It's called choking under pressure, and researchers have shown it happens because conscious monitoring disrupts skills that normally run on their own. But the answer isn't to stop thinking. That's not really possible. And it's not the point. Because self-consciousness isn't just thinking. It's when certain inner currents become louder than everything else. And last week we looked at the nervous system, so we know that there are literally electrical currents communicating with themselves in our nervous system. The inner currents we often hear that you may know well are doubt, judgment, prediction, control. Those things can get really loud, and when they do, something else gets harder to hear. Demidov called these quieter signals weak currents. Not ideas, not decisions, more like impulses, a direction of attention, a feeling to look somewhere, an inkling to pause, a need to speak. When I started Demidov work in grad school, one of the first things I noticed was that the internal commentary, the loud currents, suddenly got quieter. Not gone, just less dominant. There was still an I, still awareness, still me, but it wasn't constantly supervising everything. Demidov calls this sensation doubling. There's me, and there's not me, which is the character. And it's good to keep a little bit of me around. You don't want to fall off the edge of the stage. But there's a difference between that quiet, practical me keeping you safe and the me that's narrating and judging every choice you make. That second one is the inner critic. And when that version of me gets quieter, quiet enough for the character and the weak currents to get louder, well, that's when creativity really starts. You see, it's not about eliminating that voice or the loud currents. It's about learning not to let them take over the microphone. Because when it gets quieter, something else becomes available. Something more subtle, those weak currents again. And I don't think this is just in acting. I think everybody has this. It's our intuition. When we feel observed or evaluated, our system shifts into protection. Attention narrows, monitoring increases, control starts to squeeze its grip, which makes sense. That's what the body's supposed to do. But protection and presence are not the same thing. So maybe the question isn't, how do I stop being self-conscious? Maybe the question is, what else is here that I'm not hearing? So, I want to try something simple. Not a technique, just an experiment. Think of a moment where you felt self-conscious. An audition, a conversation, a presentation. Maybe you still feel self-conscious about it. Okay, you got it? Good. Notice what appears first. The loud currents. Doubt, judgment, prediction. Don't fight them. Just notice them. And then ask, what else is here? Not what should be here, what is already here. Maybe curiosity, maybe interest, maybe breath, maybe the impulse to actually connect. Yeah, stay with that for a moment. Not to replace anything, just to notice it exists. Because self-consciousness convinces us the loudest currents are the only ones happening. Presence begins when we realize they're not. And maybe the goal isn't to eliminate the voice that watches. Maybe it's just to stop letting it dominate the microphone, so something quieter can finally be heard. That's all for this week. Thanks for listening to The Actor's Nervous System. If you want more episodes, you can find the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, and now Substack. I'm Brian Zane. Until next time, try less, listen more, and allow life to move through you.